Do you want to know how to avoid the most expensive mistake you can possibly make as a human being? I'm going to explain that in today's episode. The most expensive mistake you can make as a human being is to think you're wise when you're not. And most of us think we're wise even though we aren't. And I'm going to prove it to you today in this discussion of a great work by Plato called Plato's Apology. This is the sequel to the text that we discussed in the last episode of the Plato Project, but you don't need to have seen that or heard it, where Socrates discusses the question of what is piety, because he's on trial. He's going to be accused by the Athenian city for being impious, which was a capital crime. Basically, it's like being accused of being unjust. Socrates was not only getting canceled, but he was threatened with a death penalty. And eventually, at the end of this text, we see, in this most dramatic of moments, the jury of Athenian men condemns Socrates as being guilty of impiety, and they condemn him to death. Why? Because they didn't like how he addressed this problem. They didn't like that he was trying to help the Athenians avoid the most expensive, powerful mistake you can possibly make. Socrates defends his way of life, which earned so much hatred by many people, and he defends it in a very unique way. But I want to explain to you why he made people so angry. And it's this simple. If you challenge people's idea that they know things, most of us, insofar as we're not trained yet as philosophers, which again, for me, does not mean an academic. It means a person who loves wisdom and is willing to admit that they're ignorant. And when they're shown that they're ignorant, they're happy to be shown that because they want to learn. They want to be wise. Why is thinking you're wise when you're not the most expensive mistake in the world? Well, first of all, you will do the worst things possible if you think you know something that you don't know. We saw that in our discussion of the Euthyphro. That's why, as I argued, ignorance actually rules the world, because people think they know things and they don't know them. That's a general problem. If you think you know what the ultimate reality of things is, and if you think you know how all of the values of the world should be realized perfectly, you don't need a teacher. You don't need a guide. You don't need correction. And anyone who tries to correct you, anyone who tries to teach you, they're basically a threat to you. So that's the general problem. But when we come to the apology, and Socrates is actually on trial, we see the problem in its most specific form. It's the question of why it is that the smartest people in a society, the most skillful people in a society, often make this most expensive of all mistakes. They make the mistake of thinking they're wise when they're not. I'm going to call this the fallacy of wisdom. The fallacy of wisdom is what got Socrates killed. That's a pretty expensive mistake to make. But the mistake goes even deeper than that. The fallacy of wisdom means that you will not pursue the way of life that you ultimately desire. And that's why this mistake is so expensive. Not only do you do things that are wrong, which you think are right at the time, but you will live in such a way that you'll never be corrected. And because you'll never be corrected, you'll live in such a way that you can't have what you want. Because what we want is a peaceful, fulfilling life. And in order to have that, we have to be able to live at peace and in good terms with our own past and our own behavior. And if we do something that isn't right, that doesn't fit with our values, if they're good values, then we rightly feel bad about that. And the best thing we can try to do is to correct it, to make what's sometimes called teshuvah in the Jewish tradition, a return to the state of purity, and it's sometimes called repentance. Every moral, ethical, spiritual tradition has an idea of seeking to make right what you do wrong. That's an important part of life. So a person who's pursuing wisdom knows because they're not wise, they're going to make mistakes. You might not be like me, but I've made many mistakes in my life. And often I don't understand the mistakes, or I don't understand the depth of the mistake until years later. And that's very painful because, you want to do the right thing. You want to make it right. So you have to try to do that as best as you can. And the saddest thing about the story that we're going to discuss today, which leads to the secret liberating insight of this story in Plato's Apology, is that by making the most expensive mistake in the world, which is thinking you're wise when you're not wise, as I said, what you're actually going to do is you're going to cut yourself off from the deepest source of joy in the world, which is the ability to be at peace with anything, even your own mortality. So if we're going to have real joy, we can't be running away from the things that we don't understand. We can't be running away from the things that we won't confront. Joy doesn't come from decreasing your awareness of reality. Joy doesn't come from running away from the things that you don't want to face. Joy comes from a state of peace. And in order to cultivate peace and tranquility in ourselves, we have to learn to come to terms with our ignorance and our mistakes. And in order to come to terms with our ignorance and our mistakes, we have to come to terms with wisdom. Socrates himself was confronted with a very deep challenge. He stands before the jury of Athens, and he says, and this was, not good, you could say, legal practice. He had only one session to try to prove his innocence in a capital case, a case in which you could be given the death penalty, which he was. And he has only essentially this speech. And Plato's record of it, we don't know if it's entirely historically accurate, but most scholars think it presents the spirit of what Socrates said. So what happened to Socrates? Why did he get accused of being impious? Well, he explains. One of his friends, his name is Chaerephon, went to the Delphic oracle. What is the Delphic oracle? Imagine whatever you think is the most trustworthy, wise source in the world today, in your tradition, in your context, whether that be science, whether it be a particular religious idea or figure. But imagine you could just ask all the greatest scientists or ask all the greatest wise people, all the greatest spiritual sages, and you could ask them, hey, ask your God or your gods, I would like to know who is the wisest person in my society. So Chaerephon went to the Delphic oracle, and that's what it was. It was the place you went to try to get the download on wisdom. And the Delphic oracle was the oracle of the god Apollo, who was a very important god in ancient Greece, who was connected to the law. And he's a central god in Homer's great stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And the Delphic oracle was the oracle, which was a woman who was like a kind of prophet called the Pythian, for complex reasons. But so if you hear a Pythian, it means the prophetess of the Delphic oracle. And the Delphic oracle reveals the wisdom of the god Apollo. Now, interestingly, the oracle reveals this wisdom usually in riddling forms. Now, you could say if you're revealing wisdom, why would it be hard to understand? Well, wisdom is always actually hard to understand. You have to interpret wisdom. So in the book of Proverbs, for example, the book of wisdom in the Bible, which urges everyone to practice philosophy, to love wisdom and pursue it above all things, especially if you want money and power and success and safety, the philosophy of the book of Proverbs says pursue wisdom. Socrates would agree. You could say, well, Socrates didn't end up well for him. Well, actually, he argues that compared to what the mistake the jurors made who condemned him, it ended up very well for him, much better for him than them, because he did not make this expensive mistake. But he had to make a choice as well, and that choice was to interpret this riddle, because Chaerephon asked the Delphic oracle, so he asked the god Apollo, the great wise god of Greek society, and he said, who's the wisest person? And in Athens, and in this context of the Greek world. And the Delphic oracle responded in a way that does not seem like a riddle at all. The oracle said, Socrates, there's no one wiser than he. So Chaerephon told Socrates this, and Socrates, who actually is very pious, so he respects the Delphic oracle. It's like everyone respected it in his society. And he said, what could the oracle mean? I'm hardly the wisest person. There's so many people smarter than me, who know more than me, who live better lives than me. But he says the oracle can't lie. Because remember, I explained in the last episode, Socrates' deepest insight is that the gods can never be evil and they can never lie. That's Socrates' basic idea of what theology is. So in other words, if you have ultimate values that contradict each other, there's a problem there. There's some kind of conflict. And Socrates believes that there can't finally be a conflict between ultimate values, or it means something is confused. Ultimate values ultimately have to be completely good, and they have to be internally coherent. They have to be truthful, and they can never deceive us or lie. So Socrates realized this idea that I'm the wisest person in the world must be a riddle. a challenge. So Socrates says, the oracle wants me to find out what it means. So Socrates then interprets the riddle, and I want you to understand this because this is an amazingly deep idea. He interprets the riddle as indicating he's supposed to adopt a certain way of life. So he's given a claim that many people like us, we might be happy to be told by some god, hey, you're the smartest person in the world. And, we might think, oh, great, yeah, I'm the smartest person in the world. But it's not smart just in the sense of intelligence. It's wisdom. The idea that you live the best kind of life and you're the most responsible person with everything that you have. So Socrates knows he's not the most wise person in the world. And yet this great authority who he reveres tells him through the oracle, there's no one wiser than you. So Socrates says, okay, it must be a riddle. Because again, the god often speaks in riddles. Wisdom speaks in riddles. So Socrates says, I decided what I needed to do to determine what this riddle meant was go and talk to the people who I think of as wise, who think they're wise. And I should talk to them. And these are basically the experts, poets who are great at poetry and think they're good at interpreting poetry, orators great at speaking, politicians who think they know what justice is, how society should be, craftsmen, or what we would call technologists, scientists, experts in general. I should go to them, the people who are wise, and I should inquire into their wisdom. And he found a consistent pattern, and this is the pattern that I call the fallacy of wisdom. It's not that wisdom doesn't exist, so let's see, what is the fallacy of wisdom? Every person he talked to who was an expert, whether in writing poems or speaking poetry beautifully, being a great orator, which think about how important that is in a courtroom or in a society like ours even that values speech, right? Or being a great politician, he went to these people and he asked them about what they knew, and often he would find they were indeed good at stuff. The craftsmen were good at their crafts. The technology, the experts, they were good at their expertise. The politicians were generally good at being good politicians. But then he found they always thought they knew more than they actually did know. And when Socrates found this out and exposed this in people, they got very angry. So what does that mean to think you know more than you know? Is that different from what we saw in the Euthyphro? In one sense, it's not in general. You could also call this the fallacy of misplaced expertise. Not of expertise. Expertise is very important and Socrates respects it. But here's what he found. People who are really wise in one area will tend to think they're wise in other areas because of that area that they're wise in. People who are really good at one thing, say making money, or being good at marketing, or being good at winning political office, they'll often think that they're good at a bunch of other things or smart in a bunch of other things because of that. This is the fallacy of wisdom. The idea that because you have expertise and knowledge in one area, you have expertise and knowledge in all areas. And Socrates found that actually everyone he talked to, even when they really were good at the particular thing they had become famous for being wise in, wise or skilled at making tools or making beautiful homes, great architects, right? Great technologists, great poets, they didn't actually understand what they thought they understood. They thought they understood far more than just the particular thing that they were good at. And so Socrates then realized, oh, this is the meaning of what the Delphic Oracle says. The riddle is that what seemed true, that Socrates was the wisest person in Athens, even in the broader whole Greek world, meant no one else was wiser than him. Socrates thought, that can't be true. I don't think I'm the wisest person. And notice this, would you trust a person who was told they were the wisest person and they thought, yeah, again, I'm the wisest person? Think about that. So would the wisest person ever think they're the wisest person? That's the paradox of wisdom. The fallacy of wisdom is because you're wise or smart in one area, we often think that we are wise and smart in other areas that we're not. And when people challenge this, we react very negatively because it challenges our sense of identity. And by reacting negatively, we make this most expensive of all mistakes. the mistake of not being happy that someone has actually helped us grow. And when we're not happy and we're not willing to learn from someone who's trying to help us grow, then we can't actually live the life that we want. Because everything that we want requires that we grow into the people wise enough, good enough, skillful enough, gentle enough to receive what we want. And let me give you an example of this. Say you want to have a very happy life, and you think that that requires money, which to some extent it does. Imagine you get all the money in the world, but you can't control your emotions. Whenever someone says something you don't like, you get really upset. Whenever things don't go the way you want, you get really depressed. So even if you have all the money in the world, if you can't control your emotions, you'll never feel good. You'll feel good for a little bit, but then stuff will change and you won't feel good. So you don't have everything you want because you don't feel good. Money by itself cannot make you feel consistently peaceful. In order to be consistently peaceful, as I said, you have to actually enjoy your life. You actually have to have a sense of harmony with your whole life, including your past. It doesn't mean everything you did in the past was good, but having harmony with your past means you do the work to make it right and to learn from it so that you can take things that were mistakes or that were even just purely negative, it seemed, you hurt yourself or you hurt someone else. And Socrates thinks they're the same thing. He thinks every time you hurt someone else, you're always hurting yourself. Every time you harm another person, you're always harming yourself. And anytime we do injustice, he thinks we always harm ourselves, just like is taught in Buddhism. So Socrates thinks it's important we don't harm other people and we don't harm ourselves. And the greatest harm that comes is from people who are unwilling to admit that they're not wise when they think they're wise. Think about how in politics or in any other area of life, disagreement is not the problem. The problem is we don't think we can learn from the people that we disagree with. In other words, the problem isn't that we think we're right. It's that we don't acknowledge we may be wrong. We don't acknowledge we might be right about one thing, but wrong about 99 other things. And that's because it's very hard to psychologically hold that state of mind. And that explains why we make this very expensive mistake. Is if we don't care more for our well-being than we do for our feelings in any given moment, anytime anyone threatens our sense of well-being in a moment, we will often lash out rather than cultivate a sense of gratitude. Like, maybe they didn't even point it out in a nice way. Maybe they were kind of even a jerk about it. But if I actually think, hey, you know what, they're right. I didn't do the right thing in that context, or I wasn't as savvy as I thought, and that actually really helps me to see that. Then if you have that attitude, you won't make this expensive mistake. You'll become a person who can actually learn from anything, even the things that seem most difficult in your life. Socrates tells the Athenians, this is what the God told me to do. He told me to practice going to everyone in my society and testing them to see whether they were actually caring for their lives the way that they thought they were. And he says if they weren't caring for their lives the way that they thought they were, I did everything I could to show them that they weren't and encourage them to do so. And he said this made many people angry, and that's why he was on trial. So Socrates wasn't impious. He wasn't unjust. He exposed the illusion of wisdom. And by exposing the illusion of wisdom, he opened up society and his country, his city, to the need to change. If you think you're wise when you're not, it means you have to change. The poet Rilke famously said, you have to change your life. In one of his poems about, in fact, related to the Oracle of Apollo. And so this is the central issue of philosophy. If you think you don't need philosophy, again, not in the academic sense, but in the sense that it's practiced in the Becoming Human project, which is based on ancient philosophy. Philosophy is a way of life, a way of loving learning, because we always can grow more and learn more. If you don't think you need wisdom, then you will not really grow as a being. And so people who don't grow as beings reject the path of wisdom. But wisdom is what you need to live a good life, and living a good life is what you want to have. so that you can have all the things that you want. You need wisdom to gain money. You need wisdom to use money well. You need wisdom to take care of your body. You need wisdom to become a good person for the people you love. You need wisdom to know how to deal with hard times, hard circumstances. Everything in life requires wisdom. And so wisdom is the key thing that we need. And therefore, if we're mistaken about having it, there's no more costly mistake than we can make. So how do we address this mistake? The simplest fact is we have to read Plato's Apology and recognize more than half of the jury condemns him. Even though I think if you read the text fairly, it's clear he's not impious, and it's clear why people would be upset with him. But we have that tendency in ourselves. So rather than judging the jurors for being, oh, how terrible, they didn't recognize Socrates' greatness and his wisdom, we have to recognize we have a tendency in ourselves to be those jurors, to not like it when things expose that we're ignorant or that we're not wise. But here's the question. Why would you just think you're wise? The funny thing is we kind of do as humans. And you can say, I don't think I'm wise. Here's my question. If you don't think you're wise, I can prove to you that you think you do or that you don't think you do right away. And this is just the case, like right now. If you really don't think you're wise, you will already have been devoting all of your best energy, time, and money to becoming wise. If you really think that you're not wise, you will be devoting all of your best time, energy, and money to becoming wise, because that's what it would mean to understand you're not wise. Wisdom is so precious that when you really understand what it is, and you really understand you don't have it, you're going to do as much as you possibly can to get better at getting it. That's what philosophy is about. That's why wise people, I think, invest their money primarily into becoming more wise. Because even money itself, you need wisdom to manage well. So philosophy is actually also the cheapest general investment strategy in the sense that if you want to become wise, you will become good at all the other things that you want to do. There's a Shaolin monk at one of the Shaolin monasteries in China. He said something very profound in this beautiful documentary that I've seen many times because I love it. He says you need to find the one skill that commands all other skills. Find the one skill that commands all other skills. And that skill, I believe, is wisdom. And Socrates pursued wisdom in a way that was socially very expensive. But he didn't make the mistake of thinking he was wise. He realized, and this is what we mean when people talk about Socratic wisdom, he realized, this is what the Delphic Oracle meant. I actually am wiser than these people because even though I don't know anything, I know I don't know anything. And when I don't know something, I don't think that I do, and I don't pretend that I do. But these people, they think they know things when, just like me, they don't actually know things. And so this is ignorance. Ignorance can either be a great source of illusion, like we see in the jurors who make the most expensive mistake of thinking they're wise when in fact they're ignorant of wisdom, like Euthyphro, who thinks he knows what piety is, but doesn't. These jurors all condemn Socrates for being impious, but they have no idea what piety is. It would require wisdom to know what piety is. Think about how often we condemn other people, including ourselves, when we don't even know what we mean. We don't even know what we mean. That's not wise. But the fact that we act based on thinking we know what we know means we think we're wise. So Socrates gives us the deepest lesson. One, you shouldn't assume you're wise. Because why would you just naturally be wise? It doesn't make any sense. We have to attain wisdom. It requires a great deal of effort, time, investment, money. You have to really work hard at it. And in order to attain that, you have to know you don't have it. Do you practice something that you think you're already good at, so good at you don't need to practice? Of course not. So the cure to ignorance as a vice, a negative trait, which we discussed in the last episode in the Plato Project series, is Socratic ignorance or Socratic wisdom. To know you're ignorant, and when you're ignorant, to not think that you know what you don't know, and to be free to admit it. So the best way to imitate Socrates is practice admitting when you're ignorant. Practice getting good at acknowledging that you don't know what you don't know. And it can seem obvious, but it's a radically transformative practice. And he says that There is a way of living that is unworthy of the human being in the Apology. And that is the way of living in which you don't examine your way of life. Ultimately, a wise person has to practice wisdom. And if your way of living doesn't make you more wise over time, Socrates says that's not the distinctively human life. So for me, philosophy is fundamentally a profoundly spiritual practice, deeply connected to science and its goodness, because you have to learn to admit you're wrong. You have to recognize gaining knowledge is very difficult. And you have to often work with other people who will test you and show you that you're wrong so that you can improve. But if we do that, then we not only get scientific knowledge in our narrow sense today, but we get ethical knowledge. And it's a great ethical insight to simply stop judging other people when you don't even know what it is that you think you know. And when we stop to do that, we then focus on ourselves and we focus on improving ourselves. And I have so much of myself I need to improve. I don't have time anymore, the more I grow, to do anything other than focus on that. I don't want to judge other people. The biggest mistakes in my life came from thinking I knew things I didn't know or judging other people for things instead of recognizing I need to just improve myself. I need to see what I don't know. I need to be happy to admit it. I need to find the people in my life who can help teach me in a kind way. And that's what I need to pursue. And that's what philosophy is all about. So if you're interested in that, please do subscribe to my channel, like this video, share it with your friends, and join the Becoming Human Project. I'm going to discuss this dialogue this coming Sunday. Every week I'll be discussing for the Becoming Human Project members the text. So for just $10 a month, you can join the Becoming Human Project, become part of the Plato Project as a class member. Of course, all of this that I'm sharing right now is for free. So please do, again, like and share it. But if you want to go deeper, check out the Becoming Human Project. You can get my Intro to Philosophy. It's part of the membership. It's a wonderful set of very accessible courses, including 2 on Plato and the whole Becoming Human Origin series. So I'd love to see you, and I encourage you to pursue wisdom in whatever way is best for you at this stage in your life. And I bless you with a beautiful weekend, a beautiful week, a beautiful life full of wisdom. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Samuel Loncar, founder of the Becoming Human Project, and I hope you'll join me in the next episode of the Plato Project.